An obese teen gives his jacket to a freezing biker on a dark, snowy night, just trying to do the right thing. But by morning, the whole town is talking, and his life will never be the same. Cameras, reporters, bullies, everyone wants a piece of the kind, fat kid. Yet no one knows who that biker really was, or the army of roaring engines he's about to bring with him. The next day, the ground shakes. 500 Hell's Angels roll into the school parking lot, leather, thunder, and loyalty, for one quiet kid who showed them what kindness really means. But when fame turns ugly and tragedy strikes, the line between hero and heartbreak begins to blur. Who is saving who? The biker or the boy? And when the engines go silent, will one act of kindness be enough to change a world that's forgotten how to care? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The first snowflakes of winter drifted down from the steel-gray Colorado sky, dusting the cracked sidewalks of Ridgeway with white. 16-year-old Noah Dawson hunched his shoulders, trying to make himself smaller as he walked home from school. His worn sneakers, the soles nearly separated from the canvas, scraped against the concrete with each step. The jacket he wore, a hand-me-down from 2 years ago, strained across his broad shoulders and left his wrists exposed to the biting wind. A group of students passed by on the other side of the street, their laughter carrying across the empty road. Noah kept his eyes down, remembering the jokes whispered in the hallways earlier that day. "Hey, wide load!" someone had called out during lunch period. The cafeteria had erupted in snickers, while Noah pretended to be deeply interested in his peanut butter sandwich. Even the teachers seemed to look past him, their eyes sliding over his raised hand in class as if he were invisible. Mrs. Patterson had asked for volunteers to help with the winter carnival decorations. But when Noah volunteered, she'd already moved on to calling on Emma Stevens in the front row. The snow was falling harder now, clinging to Noah's dark hair and melting against his neck. He quickened his pace, thinking of home, a small rental house with peeling paint and drafty windows. But home nonetheless. Inside, the kitchen counter would hold a note from his mom, Tessa, explaining which leftovers he could heat up for dinner. She'd be at the diner until late again, serving endless cups of coffee and plates of meatloaf to the regulars who came in during the dinner rush. Noah fumbled with his key, his fingers stiff from the cold, and pushed open the front door. The house was quiet and chilly. They kept the heat low to save on bills. Sure enough, a yellow sticky note waited on the counter. "Sweetie, leftover chicken casserole in the blue container. Don't forget to do your math homework. Love you, Mom." He smiled at her, familiar handwriting, the way she dotted her eyes with tiny circles. The kitchen light flickered as he turned it on, casting uneven shadows across his textbooks as he spread them out on the scratched wooden table. The math problems blurred together as his mind wandered to his mother, imagining her hurrying between tables at the Silver Spoon diner, her feet aching in the practical black shoes she'd bought on clearance. After forcing down a lukewarm portion of casserole and finishing his homework, Noah retreated to his room. The ancient radiator clanked and sputtered, barely taking the edge off the winter chill. He pulled his blanket around his shoulders and picked up his phone, scrolling through his social media feeds. The posts seemed to blur together into a tapestry of darkness. Another shooting in a distant city, polar ice caps melting, endangered animals losing their habitats. A video showed teenagers laughing as they knocked books out of a younger student's hands. The comments below were full of crying emojis and thoughts and prayers, but no one seemed to be doing anything to help. Noah's chest felt heavy as he looked out his window at the thickening snow. The streetlight cast an orange glow on the untouched white blanket covering their small front yard. He thought about his mother's unwavering faith. how she always said that God works through people's hands and hearts. "Please," he whispered into the darkness, his breath fogging the cold window pane. "Please let there still be some good left in the world, and if there is, help me find a way to be part of it." The snow continued to fall outside his window, each flake catching the light like a tiny star before joining the growing blanket below. Noah had no way of knowing that his quiet prayer would be answered sooner than he thought, or that his own actions would soon remind an entire town about the power of simple kindness. The night grew deeper, and the only sounds were the soft tick of his alarm clock and the distant hum of traffic on the highway. Noah pulled his thin blanket tighter around his shoulders, watching the snow transform the familiar landscape into something pure and new. Tomorrow would be another day of trying to fade into the background at school, of wearing clothes that didn't quite fit, of missing his mom while she worked double shifts to keep their small world turning. But for now, in the quiet of his room, Noah allowed himself to hope. Hope that somewhere in this vast, complicated world, there was still room for small miracles. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he could be the source of one of them. The social media feed on his phone continued to scroll, filled with its usual mix of carefully curated happiness and real-world tragedy. Noah closed the app and set his phone aside, choosing instead to focus on the gentle dance of snowflakes outside his window. His mother always said that God's grace was like snow. It covered everything equally, making the world clean and new again. In the kitchen below, the refrigerator hummed, and the old house creaked as it settled into the night. Noah could picture his mother at the diner, probably refilling coffee cups for the late-night truckers who stopped in for warmth and conversation. She never complained about the long hours or the aching feet, always saying they were blessed to have what they had. He thought about the homework he'd completed earlier, remembering how his teacher had barely glanced his way when he'd turned it in. It was strange, he reflected, how someone could feel so invisible in a crowded hallway, yet still hope to make some kind of difference in the world. The snow continued its silent descent, and Noah's eyes grew heavy. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring, but for now, he let himself drift off to sleep, his prayer still echoing in the quiet corners of his heart. Outside, the first winter storm of the season transformed Ridgeway into a glittering wonderland, unaware that it would serve as the backdrop for an unexpected story of kindness that would soon touch the entire community. As Noah finally surrendered to sleep, the blanket of snow grew thicker, covering the imperfections of their small town with its gentle touch. The flickering streetlight cast long shadows across his room, and somewhere in the distance, a car's tires crunched through the fresh snow, carrying another late-night traveler home through the storm. The cafeteria buzzed with the usual lunchtime chaos, but Noah felt the familiar weight of isolation pressing down on him. He sat alone at his corner table, picking at a peanut butter sandwich that had gone slightly stale. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the scratched tabletop. A burst of laughter erupted from the table behind him. Noah's shoulders tensed. He knew that laugh. It belonged to Marcus Wheeler, a junior who seemed to take particular pleasure in making Noah's life difficult. Noah tried to make himself smaller, hunching over his lunch tray, but it was too late. "Hey, look who it is!" Marcus's voice carried across the cafeteria. "The incredible expanding boy." More laughter followed. Noah kept his eyes down, counting the crumbs on his tray. His cheeks burned as he heard the distinctive sound of a phone camera clicking. He didn't need to look up to know that Marcus was filming, probably for his social media, where he posted videos mocking other students. "Come on, big guy, give us a smile for TikTok," Marcus taunted, moving closer with his phone held high. Noah gathered his things, his trembling hands betraying his calm exterior. As he stood, his knee bumped the table, sending his water bottle clattering to the floor. The cafeteria erupted in fresh laughter as he bent to retrieve it, his too small shirt riding up his back. "That's gold," Marcus crowed, still filming. "This is definitely going viral." Noah pushed through the double doors into the empty hallway, his breath coming in short gasps. He ducked into the bathroom, locking himself in a stall until the bell rang. The rest of the day passed in a blur of whispered comments and stifled giggles as the video made its rounds. By the time the final bell rang, the temperature had dropped dramatically. Heavy snow fell in thick curtains, already accumulating on the ground. Noah pulled his hood low over his face and started his long walk home, grateful for the excuse to hide. The wind cut through his thin jacket like knives. His sneakers, worn thin at the soles, offered little protection against the slush-covered sidewalks. But the cold was almost welcome. It gave him something physical to focus on instead of the burning shame of the cafeteria incident. As he passed the old Phillips gas station, its faded sign creaking in the wind, something caught his eye. Through the swirling snow, he made out the distinctive shape of a motorcycle lying on its side. Next to it, a dark figure lay sprawled in the dirty slush. Noah's heart jumped into his throat. Without hesitation, he jogged toward the fallen person, his own troubles momentarily forgotten. As he got closer, he could see it was a man in a leather jacket, now soaked through with icy water. "Sir?" Noah called out, kneeling beside the stranger. "Are you okay?" The man groaned, pushing himself up on one elbow. His face was weathered and lined, decorated with a salt and pepper beard. Tattoos peeked out from beneath his collar, and his eyes, when they met Noah's, were sharp despite his predicament. "I'm fine, kid," the man growled, though his trembling betrayed him. "Bike hit a patch of ice. Just caught me off guard." Noah could see the man was far from fine. His clothes were soaked through, and his hands shook as he tried to push himself up. Without thinking, Noah began shrugging off his jacket. "Don't be stupid," the man protested. But Noah was already wrapping his only winter jacket around the stranger's shoulders. "You look colder than I ever could be," Noah said simply, surprising himself with the steadiness in his voice. He reached down to help the man to his feet, trying not to show how much effort it took to support the larger man's weight. Together, they turned their attention to the fallen motorcycle, a Harley-Davidson that had seen better days. Noah positioned himself on one side while the stranger took the other, and together they managed to right the heavy bike. "Name's Grizz," the man said gruffly as they pushed the motorcycle toward the gas station's dim lights. "Grizz Malone." Noah started to reply, but a violent shiver cut off his words. The cold was really starting to bite now without his jacket. Grizz looked at him sharply, something unreadable passing across his face. But before Noah could finish his introduction, the older man had swung his leg over the motorcycle's seat. The engine roared to life on the second try, and without another word, Grizz Malone disappeared into the snowy darkness, taking Noah's only jacket with him. Noah stood there for a long moment, watching the red taillight fade into the storm. His arms were numb, and his thin shirt offered little protection against the biting wind. Yet somehow, he felt warmer inside than he had all day. The humiliation of the cafeteria seemed distant now, less important somehow. As he turned toward home, snow collecting in his dark hair, Noah wrapped his arms around himself. His teeth chattered, and his fingers had gone numb, but there was a curious lightness in his chest. He'd helped someone today. Really helped them. Not for likes or views or social media fame, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The walk home was brutal in the strengthening storm, but Noah barely noticed. His mind kept returning to the gruff biker with the sharp eyes, wondering if he'd made it safely to wherever he was heading. The memory of Marcus's cruel laughter faded with each step, replaced by the simple satisfaction of having done something good, something real. By the time Noah reached his front door, his clothes were soaked through and his lips had taken on a bluish tinge. But as he fumbled with his key, he realized he didn't regret giving away his jacket. Not even a little bit. Morning sunlight streamed through Noah's bedroom window, making the melting snow outside sparkle like scattered diamonds. His body ached from last night's cold, and his nose felt stuffed up. As he made his way downstairs, the wooden steps creaking under his weight, the smell of coffee and toast filled the air. Tessa Dawson stood at the kitchen counter, her diner uniform already on, hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She turned as Noah entered, her eyes narrowing at his sniffling. "Noah James Dawson," she said, placing her hands on her hips. "Where is your jacket? And why do you sound like you're catching a cold?" Noah slumped into a kitchen chair, avoiding her concerned gaze. I lost it," he mumbled, reaching for the toast she'd made. "Lost it?" Tessa's voice rose slightly. "That jacket cost us 3 weeks of careful budgeting. How could you be so careless?" She pressed the back of her hand against his forehead, checking for fever. "And now you're getting sick. Noah, you know we can't afford doctor visits right now." "I'm sorry, Mom," he said quietly, guilt weighing heavy in his stomach. He couldn't bring himself to tell her what really happened. She worked so hard for everything they had. The bus ride to school was uncomfortable without his jacket, but at least the heating worked today. Noah hunched in his usual seat near the back, trying to make himself as small as possible, a futile effort for someone his size. The first hint that something was different came as he walked through the school's main entrance. A group of freshman girls stopped talking as he passed, their eyes following him with unusual interest. In his first period class, his English teacher, Mrs. Martinez, smiled at him warmly, something she'd never done before. By second period, the whispers were impossible to ignore. Noah caught fragments as he moved between classes. "That's him. Gave his only jacket. To some homeless biker? In the snow?" During third period, his phone started vibrating continuously in his pocket. Noah waited until lunch break to check it, finding dozens of notifications from social media accounts he barely used. His hands trembled as he opened the first one. There it was, a video shot from inside the Phillips station. The grainy security footage showed him helping Grizz, taking off his jacket, and pushing the motorcycle through the snow. Someone had added dramatic music and captions. "Obese teen gives only coat to stranded biker in snowstorm." The video had thousands of shares already. Comments poured in from across the country. This brought tears to my eyes. "True angels walk among us. This young man's parents must be so proud. In a world full of hate, be like this kid." Noah's face burned as he sat alone at his usual lunch table, trying to make sense of it all. The cafeteria buzzed with unusual energy, and he could feel eyes on him from every direction. Marcus, the guy who'd filmed him being mocked just yesterday, walked past with his head down, unable to meet Noah's eyes. Mrs. Peterson, his math teacher, stopped by his table. "What you did was very brave, Noah," she said softly. "We're all very proud of you." She'd never spoken to him outside of class before. The afternoon brought more surprises. His phone continued to explode with notifications, friend requests from strangers, messages from local news stations, and even interview requests from national morning shows. The video had been picked up by major news websites, each sharing the story of the selfless teen who gave away his only protection against the cold. By the time Noah walked home, still jacketless, his social media followers had jumped from 23 to over 2,000. His inbox was flooded with messages from people calling him a hero, an inspiration, a symbol of hope in dark times. Tessa was waiting when he got home, her eyes red and watery. She'd seen the video at work. Apparently, customers had been showing it to her all day. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, pulling him into a tight hug. "Oh, Noah, I scolded you this morning and all along." Her voice cracked with emotion. Noah stood awkwardly in his mother's embrace, his own eyes growing misty. "It wasn't a big deal, Mom," he whispered. "He needed it more than me." "Not a big deal?" Tessa pulled back, cupping his face in her hands. "Noah, do you have any idea how many people you've touched? The diner was full of people talking about it. Mrs. Henderson cried right into her coffee. Even that grumpy Mr. Peterson left me a $20 tip because he was so moved by that wonderful son of yours." Later that night, Noah sat on his bed, staring at his phone in disbelief. The number of friend requests had topped 500. Messages continued to pour in, from fellow students who'd never spoken to him before, from strangers across the country, from local news reporters asking for interviews. One message caught his eye. From a girl in his grade named Amber. "I've seen you around school for 2 years, but I never really saw you until today. What you did was beautiful. I'm sorry it took this for people to notice." Noah placed his phone on his nightstand, his mind whirling. All his life, he'd felt invisible, or worse, visible only as a target for cruel jokes. Now suddenly, everyone was looking at him, but seeing something different. They weren't seeing his size or his worn-out clothes or his quietness. They were seeing his heart. He touched his chest where the missing jacket should have been. The house was warm, but he could still feel the bite of last night's snow, the weight of Grizz's trembling body as he helped him up, the rough texture of the motorcycle grip as they pushed it through the slush. Simple moments that had somehow changed everything. From downstairs, he could hear his mother on the phone, probably talking to his aunt about the video. Her voice was proud, happy in a way he hadn't heard in a long time. Noah closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the day's events. For the first time in his life, the world wasn't looking past him. It was looking straight at him, and instead of judgment, he found appreciation. Instead of mockery, he found respect. His phone buzzed again. Another message, another friend request, another reminder that somehow, overnight, his small act of kindness had touched something in people's hearts. Noah Dawson, the fat kid nobody saw, had become visible. And what they saw, surprisingly, was beautiful. The next few days swept through Noah's life like a whirlwind. At the diner where Tessa worked, customers lined up just to catch a glimpse of that hero's mom. Regular patrons who'd barely noticed her before now left $20 tips, some even stuffing extra cash in her apron pocket with warm smiles and kind words. "Your boy restored my faith in humanity," Mrs. Henderson said, pressing a $50 bill into Tessa's hand one morning. Tessa tried to refuse, but the elderly woman wouldn't hear of it. "That coat probably cost more than this. Let us help." The local news vans became a familiar sight outside their small house. Reporters with perfect hair and bright smiles knocked on their door, eager to share Noah's story with their viewers. Noah answered their questions quietly, shoulders hunched, face burning red under the bright camera lights. "What made you stop that night?" they asked. "He needed help," Noah would say simply, his voice barely above a whisper. Anyone would have done the same. But not everyone saw it that way. 3 days after the video went viral, the first negative comments appeared online. Someone claimed they'd seen Noah practicing the scene beforehand. Another suggested he'd hired someone to film it. "Bet he staged the whole thing," read one comment that made Noah's stomach clench. "Nobody's that selfless anymore. Kid probably wanted his 15 minutes of fame." The whispers at school changed too. The same students who'd patted his back and called him a hero now huddled in corners, snickering behind their hands. Marcus, who'd filmed the original bullying video, started a new trend, recording himself mimicking Noah's walk, exaggerating his size, pretending to give away imaginary coats. Noah's phone buzzed constantly with notifications from cruel memes and fake accounts mocking him. Pictures of him helping Grizz were edited to include sarcastic captions. Fame-seeking teen's publicity stunt backfires, and local attention seeker exposed. That Thursday night, Noah sat in his bedroom, his thumb hovering over his social media apps. The screen blurred as tears welled in his eyes. With a deep breath, he deleted them all. Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. The sudden silence felt both relieving and lonely. The next morning, Friday, Noah walked through the school halls like a ghost. In English class, when Mrs. Martinez asked him about the symbolism in "to kill a mockingbird," he kept his eyes fixed on his desk and shrugged. The teacher who'd praised his kindness earlier that week now frowned with concern. By lunchtime, Noah's shoulders ached from carrying the weight of judgmental stares. He sat alone at his usual table, unwrapping the sandwich his mother had carefully packed that morning. The cafeteria hummed with the usual chaos of high school life, until a low, distant rumble cut through the noise. At first it sounded like far-off thunder, but the sound grew steadily louder. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, and the windows began to vibrate. Curious students abandoned their lunches, pressing their faces against the glass. The rumble became a roar, and then they saw them. Motorcycles, hundreds of them, flowing into the school parking lot like a river of chrome and black leather. They came in waves, their engines harmonizing in a thunderous chorus that made the building itself seem to tremble. Noah stood up slowly, his sandwich forgotten. Through the windows, he watched as the bikes arranged themselves in neat rows, filling every available space in the parking lot. There must have been 500 riders at least, men and women of all ages, their leather vests decorated with patches and pins that caught the midday sun. At the head of this mechanical army rode a familiar figure on a massive Harley-Davidson. Noah's heart skipped a beat as he recognized Grizz Malone, the man he'd helped that snowy night. The big biker cut his engine, and others followed suit until the thunder died down to an expectant silence. Principal Hughes burst out of his office, his tie slightly askew, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. He pushed through the front doors, followed by two nervous-looking security guards. The students watched, transfixed, as their principal approached the wall of bikers. Grizz swung his leg over his motorcycle with surprising grace for such a large man. He removed his helmet, revealing the same weathered face Noah remembered from that night, though now clean-shaven and clear-eyed. The biker's boots crunched on the asphalt as he walked toward Principal Hughes. The entire school seemed to hold its breath. Through the open windows, Noah could hear their conversation clearly. "Can I help you?" Principal Hughes asked, his voice struggling to sound authoritative. Grizz looked past him, toward the school building. His voice carried easily across the parking lot, deep and gravelly but somehow gentle. "We're here for the kid who gave me his coat." The cafeteria erupted in whispers. Hundreds of eyes turned to Noah, who stood frozen by his lunch table, his heart pounding so hard he could barely breathe. The same students who'd been mocking him minutes ago now stared in awe as the scene unfolded. Grizz's voice rang out again, louder this time. "Noah Dawson, come on out here, son. Your family's waiting to meet you." Principal Hughes turned toward the school, his face softening as he spotted Noah through the window. He nodded slightly, a gesture that seemed to say both, "It's okay," and "I'm sorry I didn't see you before." Noah's legs felt like lead as he made his way through the cafeteria. The sea of students parted before him, their expressions a mix of shock, respect, and shame. As he pushed open the heavy front doors and stepped into the sunlight, 500 bikers raised their fists in a silent salute. Grizz stood waiting, his massive frame backlit by the midday sun, a proud smile breaking through his tough exterior. Behind him, hundreds of men and women who lived their lives on the edges of society had come together to honor a simple act of kindness. They had come for him, Noah Dawson, the fat kid nobody saw, the boy who gave away his coat without a second thought. The front doors of Ridgeway High burst open as teachers and students poured into the parking lot, drawn by the incredible sight of hundreds of bikers standing at attention. Behind them came local news crews, cameras already rolling, rushing to capture this extraordinary moment. Principal Hughes stood to the side, looking both bewildered and amazed as Grizz Malone stepped forward, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. "Listen up!" Grizz's voice boomed across the parking lot, commanding instant attention. "This young man right here?" He gestured toward Noah, who stood trembling near the school entrance. "He found me in the snow 3 nights ago, my bike down, freezing half to death. He didn't know me, didn't owe me anything. But you know what he did?" The crowd hung on every word as Grizz continued, his voice growing softer but no less powerful. "He gave me his only coat, his last bit of warmth on a bitter night. That's the kind of person we don't see enough of anymore." News cameras swiveled toward Noah, who felt his cheeks burning red. He wanted to disappear, to shrink away from all these eyes, but Grizz's next words held him in place. "He gave when he had nothing. That's real power," Grizz declared, looking directly into the nearest camera. "Not muscles, not money, not fame, just pure heart." 2 bikers gently guided Noah forward, their leather-clad hands respectful on his shoulders. He could feel himself shaking, caught between fear and disbelief. The sea of bikers before him suddenly erupted in cheers, and dozens of motorcycles roared to life in a thunderous salute that echoed off the school buildings. Grizz raised his hands, and the engines fell silent. "Today," he announced, his voice carrying across the hushed parking lot, "we're making Noah Dawson an honorary brother of the angels, because he showed us what brotherhood really means." Noah's classmates, who had gathered in clusters around the scene, fell completely silent. Many of them shifted uncomfortably, perhaps remembering their own recent treatment of him. The boy they'd mocked and filmed just days ago now stood surrounded by hundreds of fierce protectors. The ceremony was brief but powerful. Grizz draped a leather vest over Noah's shoulders, its back patch declaring him a friend of the angels. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and through it all, Noah stood in a daze, barely able to process what was happening. As the crowd began to disperse and the bikers prepared to leave, Grizz approached Noah and his mother Tessa, who had arrived from the diner still wearing her work uniform. "Let me give you folks a ride home," he offered, gesturing to his pickup truck parked nearby. "Think we could all use a quiet moment to talk?" The drive home was peaceful, a welcome contrast to the chaos of the afternoon. Grizz stopped at Burger Heaven, insisting on treating them to dinner. Soon they were seated around the Dawsons' small kitchen table, unwrapping warm burgers and sharing fries from greasy paper bags. "I never got to properly thank you," Grizz said, his gruff voice gentler now in the quiet kitchen. He looked down at his half-eaten burger, seeming to gather his thoughts. "That night, I was headed to Pueblo, trying to make things right with my daughter Sarah. Haven't spoken to her in 15 years. Tessa reached across the table, briefly touching his hand in silent support. Grizz cleared his throat before continuing. "Got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 6 months ago, stage 4. Made me realize some things about what matters in life." He took a long breath. "Was trying to get to her place when the bike went down. If Noah hadn't come along, Anyone would have helped, Noah mumbled, but Grizz shook his head firmly. No, son, they wouldn't. I laid there watching cars pass by for 20 minutes before you showed up. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. Been thinking a lot about why you did it. Why a kid who clearly didn't have much to spare would give his coat to a stranger. Noah stared at his plate, pushing a French fry around with his finger. I guess. I just know what it feels like when nobody sees you, when you need help but everyone looks away. His voice grew quieter. I never thought I mattered much. Grizz's laugh was gentle, almost fatherly. You matter more than most men twice your size, Noah. What you did that night, that's real strength, real character. He gestured toward the window, where a few bikers still kept watch over the house. Those men and women out there, they've spent their lives trying to look tough, to prove they matter through force. But you proved you matter through kindness. Tessa wiped tears from her eyes, reaching for her son's hand. The kitchen fell into a comfortable silence as they finished their meal, the old fluorescent light humming softly overhead. Outside, a light snow had begun to fall again, but inside, something warm and profound was taking root, a friendship that would change both their lives, a quiet redemption blossoming in the most unlikely of places. The conversation meandered into the evening, touching on Grizz's decades with the Angels, Noah's struggles at school, and Tessa's dreams for her son's future. With each passing hour, the initial strangeness of their gathering faded, replaced by a growing sense of connection that transcended their obvious differences. The night deepened around them, and still they talked, sharing stories and hopes and quiet understanding. In that humble kitchen, over empty burger wrappers and cooling coffee, 3 souls found an unexpected family: the lonely teenager, the worried mother, and the tough biker facing his own mortality. Each of them had been searching for something they couldn't quite name, and somehow they'd found it in each other's company. The Monday morning sun had barely risen when the first rumble of motorcycles echoed down Noah's street. Standing on his front porch, clutching his backpack, Noah watched in amazement as 20 bikers pulled up, their chrome gleaming in the early light. At their head was Grizz, his leather jacket catching the golden rays. "Your chariot awaits, kid," Grizz called out with a grin, gesturing to a sidecar attached to his Harley Davidson. Noah's face flushed red as he waved goodbye to his mother, who stood in the doorway wiping tears from her eyes. The ride to school felt surreal. People stepped out of their houses, coffee cups in hand, to watch the procession. Cars pulled over to let them pass. Some folks even cheered and waved, their phones raised to capture the moment. Noah slouched lower in the sidecar, still unused to all the attention. "Sit up straight," Grizz shouted over the engine noise. "You've got nothing to be ashamed of." At school, students gathered at the windows as the motorcycles thundered into the parking lot. News vans were already waiting, cameras rolling as Noah climbed out of the sidecar. The reporters had dubbed it the Ride of Brotherhood, and the story was spreading across the country. "Same time after school," Grizz said, giving Noah's shoulder a squeeze. "Nobody messes with family." Throughout the week, the pattern continued. Each morning and afternoon, the bikers appeared like clockwork, their presence transforming Noah's daily commute into something remarkable. The initial embarrassment began to fade as Noah noticed how the attention had changed things at school. Teachers smiled at him more often. Students who had once ignored him now nodded in greeting. Even his old tormentors kept their distance, perhaps intimidated by the leather-clad guardians waiting outside. Back home, Tessa struggled to process the dramatic change in their lives. Each night, after her shift at the diner, she would sit at their small kitchen table and cry, sometimes from joy, sometimes from sheer overwhelm. Customers now left her generous tips, having seen her on the news. Some even asked for photos with the mother of the angel boy. "I just don't understand it all," she confided to Grizz one evening as he worked on fixing their leaky kitchen faucet. "Why us? Why Noah?" Grizz wiped his hands on a rag and straightened up from under the sink. "Because your boy showed genuine kindness when the world had given him every reason not to. That's rare, Tessa. That's special." Grizz had become a constant presence in their lives, showing up with tools to fix things they couldn't afford to repair. He taught Noah basic motorcycle maintenance in the driveway, patiently explaining the difference between wrenches and sharing stories about his years on the road. "See this spark plug?" he'd say, holding it up to the light. "Treat it right, and it'll never let you down. Same goes for people." On Sunday morning, to everyone's surprise, Grizz showed up at their small Methodist church. His tattooed arms and leather vest stood out among the pastel dresses and pressed suits, but he held his head high. The congregation whispered at first, but when Noah proudly led him to sit with them in their usual pew, the murmurs turned to warm smiles. After the service, several church ladies insisted on having Grizz try their potluck dishes. He sampled each one politely, praising the cornbread, and asking for the recipe for the sweet potato casserole. Noah watched in amazement as the tough biker charmed the entire congregation with his unexpected gentleness. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Noah and Grizz sat on the front porch steps. The air was cooling, carrying the scent of approaching autumn. They had been quiet for a while, watching cars pass by, when Grizz broke the silence. "Got something to tell you, kid." His voice was rougher than usual. "Remember how I mentioned my daughter that first night?" Noah nodded, turning to look at the older man's profile against the sunset. "Her name's Amber. Haven't spoken to her in 10 years. Grizz's fingers traced one of his tattoos absently. "She was right to cut me off. I was a different man back then. Angry, selfish. Missed her college graduation because I was passed out drunk in some bar in Nevada." Noah listened quietly as Grizz continued, his voice growing thick with emotion. "She's got a son now. My grandson. Never even met him." He pulled out his wallet, revealing a worn photograph of a young woman with his same determined jaw. "Found her on Facebook last year. She's running some kind of veterans shelter in Denver, helping people just like you do." "Why don't you message her?" Noah asked softly. "Tell her what you told me?" Grizz shook his head. "After 10 years, what right do I have?" "The same right I had to help a stranger in the snow," Noah replied, surprising himself with his boldness. "Forgiveness works both ways, Grizz. Maybe she's waiting for you to try." The old biker stared at him for a long moment, then pulled out his phone. With trembling fingers, he opened Facebook and found his daughter's profile. Noah watched as he typed, deleted, and typed again, finally settling on a simple message. "Amber, it's Dad. I know I don't deserve it, but I'd like to talk. I miss you. I'm sorry for everything." His thumb hovered over the send button for what felt like hours. Finally, Noah reached over and gently pressed it himself. The message whooshed away into the digital void, carrying with it 10 years of regret and hope. They sat in silence as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, the weight of the moment settling around them like a blanket. Crickets began their evening chorus, and somewhere down the street, a dog barked at the rising moon. "Scariest thing I've ever done," Grizz admitted finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Braver than any motorcycle stunt," Noah agreed, bumping his shoulder against the older man's. That night, as Noah lay in bed, he could hear his mother and Grizz talking softly on the porch, their voices carrying through his open window. They spoke of second chances and redemption, of the strange ways God worked in people's lives. Noah drifted off to sleep with a smile, knowing that sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest acts of kindness. The morning sun streamed through Tessa's kitchen windows, casting warm squares of light across the worn linoleum floor. Noah sat at the table, watching his mother fuss over the coffee maker and straighten the already neat stack of magazines for the 10th time. "Mom, everything looks fine," he assured her, but Tessa continued her nervous tidying. "I just want it to be perfect," she said, adjusting a flower vase filled with fresh daisies from their tiny garden. "This is such an important moment for Grizz." They'd gotten the message 2 days ago. Amber had replied to her father's Facebook message, agreeing to come to Ridgeway. Now they were waiting for her arrival, the air thick with anticipation. The doorbell chimed at exactly 10 o'clock. Noah's heart jumped as Tessa hurried to answer it. In the doorway stood a woman in her mid-30s, wearing a crisp blue blazer that couldn't quite hide her nervous energy. Her brown hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she had Grizz's determined jaw. Behind her, partially hidden, was a small boy with curious eyes and unruly dark hair. "Hi, I'm Amber," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "And this is Tommy." The 7-year-old boy peeked out from behind his mother's legs, offering a shy wave. Noah noticed he was clutching a toy motorcycle in his other hand. Tessa welcomed them warmly, ushering them into the kitchen where coffee and homemade muffins waited. Tommy's eyes lit up at the sight of the treats, and after an encouraging nod from his mother, he climbed into a chair next to Noah. "You're the guy from the video," Tommy said suddenly, recognition dawning on his face. "The one who helped Grandpa." The word Grandpa hung in the air, making Amber's breath catch. She hadn't meant for Tommy to use that term yet, but children had their own way of cutting through complications. As Tessa poured coffee, Noah found himself telling the story again. But this time, it was different. He wasn't talking to reporters or cameras. He was telling a daughter about her father's vulnerable moment. "He was shaking so bad from the cold," Noah explained, watching Amber's face carefully. "The bike had slipped on some ice and he couldn't get it up by himself. He tried to wave me away at first, but I could see how much pain he was in." Amber's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "That sounds like Dad," she said softly. "Too proud to ask for help." Noah continued, describing how Grizz had finally accepted his coat, how he'd helped push the motorcycle to safety. "He was worried about bothering anyone," Noah added, "but sometimes people need to be bothered." Tommy, who had been quietly munching on a muffin, piped up. "Mom bothers people all the time. She says that's how you help them." This brought a genuine smile to Amber's face. "I run a nonprofit called Second Chance Veterans Home in Denver," she explained. "We help homeless veterans find housing and jobs. Sometimes it means being persistent, even when they push you away." "Just like your father," Tessa observed gently. Before Amber could respond, they heard the rumble of a truck outside. Noah saw her stiffen slightly, her hand automatically reaching for Tommy's shoulder. Through the window, they watched Grizz carefully make his way up the walk, moving slower than usual. The chemotherapy had taken its toll over the past week. The kitchen door creaked open. Grizz stood there, his large frame filling the doorway, but somehow looking smaller than Noah had ever seen him. His eyes found Amber's immediately. "Hi, baby girl," he said, his gruff voice cracking slightly. Amber stood, her composure wavering. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, a decade of hurt and hope suspended between them. Then Tommy broke the spell by running straight to Grizz. "Are you really my grandpa?" he asked, holding up his toy motorcycle. "Mom says you ride a real one." Grizz knelt down to Tommy's level, though it clearly pained him. "Sure do, little man, though I'm taking a break from riding right now." "Because you're sick," Tommy asked, with a child's direct honesty. The question seemed to break something open in Amber. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she crossed the kitchen in 3 quick steps and wrapped her arms around her father. Grizz held her tight, his own eyes glistening. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry for everything." "I know, Dad," Amber sobbed. "I know." Noah and Tessa quietly slipped out onto the back porch, giving the family privacy for their reunion. Through the window, they could see Tommy showing Grizz his collection of toy vehicles, while Amber wiped her eyes with a napkin. "It's not perfect," Tessa observed, watching the scene. "But it's real." "Sometimes real is better than perfect," Noah replied. They spent the rest of the morning together, the awkward pauses gradually giving way to cautious laughter. Amber shared stories about her work with veterans, and Noah could see where she got her father's determination to help others. Grizz listened intently, pride evident in his eyes, as she described the programs she'd developed. "Actually," Amber said, turning to Noah, "we have our annual fundraiser next weekend in Denver. Would you consider being our guest speaker?" Noah's eyes widened. "Me? But I'm just a kid." Amber shook her head. "You're the kid who showed my father kindness when he needed it most. Your story, our story now. It's exactly what people need to hear." The following Saturday, Noah found himself standing at a podium in a hotel ballroom in Denver. The room was packed with veterans, donors, and community leaders. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone. But when he looked out at the audience, he saw Grizz and Amber sitting together in the front row, Tommy perched between them. His mother sat nearby, beaming with pride. "I never meant to do anything special," Noah began. "I just saw someone who needed help. But that's the thing about kindness. You never know how far it will reach." As he told the story once more, he watched tears and smiles spread through the audience. When he described how Grizz had brought hundreds of bikers to his school, several veterans in the crowd nodded in understanding. Brotherhood, they knew, came in many forms. "What I learned," Noah continued, his voice growing stronger, "is that sometimes the smallest act of giving can change more than one life. That night I gave away a coat, but what I got back was a friend, a mentor, and the chance to witness healing that was 10 years in the making." The story spread again, but this time it was different. Churches shared it as a lesson in forgiveness. Schools used it to teach about the ripple effects of kindness. Veteran groups celebrated it as a testament to the power of community. After his speech, as people lined up to shake his hand, Noah watched Grizz and Amber across the room. They were talking quietly, heads bent together, while Tommy zoomed his toy motorcycle across the table between them. The scene wasn't perfect. There were still awkward moments, still hurts to heal, but it was beautiful in its imperfection. Later that evening, at their hotel, Noah found Grizz sitting alone on the balcony, looking out over the city lights. "Thank you," the older man said simply. "For what?" "For showing me it's never too late to make things right." The first hints of spring painted Colorado's mountains with tender green as Grizz and Amber stood before a crowd at the Veterans Center, announcing their ambitious plan. The Ride for Kindness would span 5 days across the state's most scenic routes, raising awareness and funds for both homeless veterans and struggling teens. "2 causes," Grizz explained, his voice carrying across the packed room, "because sometimes the people who need help most are those we forget to see." Noah sat in the back row, fidgeting with the sleeve of his new leather jacket, a gift from the bikers who'd become his unlikely guardians. When Grizz called him forward, his heart hammered against his ribs. "What do you say, kid?" Grizz asked, a gentle smile crinkling his weathered face. "Ready to learn how to ride?" Noah's eyes widened. "Me? On a motorcycle?" "Right behind me," Grizz assured him. Can't think of a better way to show what this is all about. Tessa, standing nearby, looked worried but nodded her approval. Just promise to be careful, she said, squeezing Noah's hand. The next few weeks buzzed with preparation. Amber's non-profit coordinated with veteran groups across the state, while local businesses designed special patches, black circles with bold white letters declaring, "Kindness is strength." Noah watched in amazement as orders flooded in from across the country. Grizz spent patient hours teaching Noah the basics of riding pillion. "Lean when I lean," he instructed. "Trust the bike, trust me, and most importantly, trust yourself." Their first practice run around town left Noah exhilarated. The wind wrapped around him like a living thing, and the rumble of the engine beneath felt like a heartbeat. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel weighted down by his size or his insecurities. He felt free. The morning of the ride dawned clear and crisp. Thousands gathered in the high school parking lot where Noah's story had first gone viral. Bikes of every make and model gleamed in the early light, their riders wearing the special patches. Veterans stood proud in their service caps, families clustered with homemade signs, and news crews jostled for position. Amber took the microphone, her voice strong with emotion. "This ride isn't just about raising money," she said. "It's about showing that every single person has the power to make a difference. My father and Noah taught me that." Tommy, wearing a miniature leather vest covered in patches, bounced excitedly beside her. "Go, Grandpa," he shouted, making the crowd laugh. Tessa helped Noah adjust his helmet, tears in her eyes. "My boy," she whispered, straightening his jacket. "Who would have thought that one cold night would lead to all this?" Noah climbed onto the back of Grizz's Harley, his hands finding the familiar holds they'd practiced. The motorcycle thrummed beneath them, powerful and patient. Grizz looked back with a wink. "Ready to show him how it's done?" The roar of hundreds of engines firing up made the ground shake. Police escorts led the way as the massive parade of bikes began to move. Noah's heart soared as they pulled onto the highway, the long line of riders stretching behind them like a chrome river in the morning sun. Through mountain passes they rode, the air growing thin and crisp. In small towns, people lined the streets waving American flags. Children perched on parents' shoulders, holding signs that read, "Thank you," and "Heroes ride here." At each stop, crowds gathered to donate and share stories. Noah noticed how Grizz took more frequent breaks than the other riders, how his movements seemed stiffer. But the old biker's spirit never wavered. He shared meals with homeless veterans, listened to their stories, and promised that help was coming. His gruff exterior had softened, revealing the gentle heart that Noah had glimpsed that snowy night. Amber coordinated everything with quiet efficiency, managing volunteers and tracking donations that exceeded their wildest hopes. During lunch breaks, she'd sit with Noah, sharing stories about her father's younger days and her own journey to forgiveness. "Sometimes," she told him, "it takes someone outside the family to help heal what's broken inside it." The final day of the ride painted the sky in spectacular colors. As they cruised along a scenic mountain highway, the setting sun turned the world to gold. Noah felt overcome with joy and gratitude. He lifted his arms to the sky, feeling the rush of wind and freedom. Behind them, thousands of bikes thundered like rolling thunder, a symphony of brotherhood and hope. Grizz guided them into the final stop, a sprawling park where crowds waited with banners and cheers. As they pulled to a stop, Noah's elation turned to terror. Grizz's body went rigid, his hand clutching his chest. Before Noah could react, the massive man slumped sideways. "Dad!" Amber's scream cut through the rumble of engines. Noah caught Grizz before he could fall, easing him to the ground. The proud biker's face had gone gray, his breathing shallow and labored. Nearby bikes fell silent as word spread, creating a wave of eerie quiet. "Someone call 911, Noah shouted, holding Grizz's hand as Amber ran to them. Paramedics pushed through the crowd, their urgent voices abai, stark contrast to the heavy silence that had fallen over the gathered thousands. The once joyous celebration turned into a tableau of held breath and whispered prayers as medical professionals worked over the fallen rider. Tommy clung to his mother, tears streaming down his face. "Is Grandpa going to be okay?" The wail of approaching sirens split the air, and the crowd parted like a sea to let the ambulance through. Noah stood frozen, watching as they loaded Grizz onto a stretcher, the man who had become like a second father to him, now looking small and vulnerable under the harsh emergency lights. The mighty roar of hundreds of motorcycles had faded to complete silence, replaced by the sound of prayers and quiet sobs as the gathered crowd watched their leader, their brother, their friend being tended to by emergency personnel. The golden sunset that had seemed so triumphant moments before now cast long, uncertain shadows across the scene. The fluorescent lights in the hospital waiting room cast a harsh, unnatural glow over everything. Noah slumped in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his body aching from sitting for hours. Beside him, Amber stared straight ahead, her fingers mechanically turning the silver ring on her thumb over and over. Through the glass partition, they could see the steady rhythm of medical machinery, their soft beeping a constant reminder of Grizz's fight for life. Neither of them spoke much. What was there to say when your world narrowed down to watching someone breathe? Dr. Martinez, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes, approached them with a manila folder tucked under her arm. "The tests confirm what we feared," she said gently. "The cancer has become more aggressive. It spread to his lymph nodes and liver faster than we anticipated." Amber's hand found Noah's, squeezing tight. "What does that mean for his chances?" "He's in critical condition," the doctor explained. "The next 48 hours will be crucial." Outside the hospital's sliding doors, a small crowd of reporters had gathered. Their cameras flashed whenever anyone walked past, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous biker whose charity ride had captured national attention. Several tried to wave Noah over, calling his name, but he turned away. The story they wanted, of triumph and celebration, had transformed into something else entirely. The days blurred together in a haze of stale coffee and half-eaten sandwiches from the hospital cafeteria. Noah missed school, but nobody seemed to care. His mother brought fresh clothes and hugged him tight, understanding his need to stay. The waiting room became their temporary home, with other bikers rotating through in shifts, bringing food and offering support. One evening, as Noah picked at a container of cold noodles, he turned to Amber with tears in his eyes. "I pushed him too hard," he whispered. "If I hadn't agreed to the ride, if I hadn't encouraged him to do so much—" "Stop," Amber said firmly, taking the container from his trembling hands. "You gave him peace, not pain." She wiped at her own eyes with the heel of her hand. "Do you know what these past few months meant to him? After years of regret and loneliness, you helped him find purpose again. You brought his family back together." Noah looked down at his hands. "I just wanted to help." "And you did," Amber assured him. "More than you'll ever know." When midnight crept around and the hospital corridors grew quiet, Noah slipped past the nurse's station. He knew he wasn't supposed to be in the ICU after hours, but he needed to see Grizz. The room was dark except for the soft glow of monitoring equipment, making the tough biker look smaller somehow, vulnerable beneath the white sheets. Noah pulled a chair close to the bed, careful not to disturb any of the tubes or wires. He took Grizz's weathered hand in his own, noting how the tattoos seemed faded in the dim light. "I never told you," Noah whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "But you saved me too. Before that night in the snow, I felt invisible, worthless. But you showed me that kindness isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing we've got." The machines beeped steadily in response to his words. Noah wiped his eyes with his free hand. "The whole town's praying for you. Tommy keeps asking when his grandpa's coming home. And Amber, she needs you. I need you." Grizz's fingers twitched slightly, and his eyes fluttered open. A faint smile crossed his pale face as he recognized Noah. His voice was barely audible, rough like gravel, but his words were clear. "Keep the fire warm, kid." Noah leaned closer, squeezing his hand. "I will. I promise." He meant it with every fiber of his being, the promise to carry forward everything Grizz had taught him about brotherhood, redemption, and the power of simple kindness. The room fell quiet again except for the steady rhythm of the machines, each beep a reminder of precious time passing. Noah stayed there, holding his mentor's hand, watching over the man who had changed not just his life, but an entire community's understanding of what real strength looks like. A week passed like a shadow over the town of Ridgeway. When word spread that Grizz had slipped away peacefully in his sleep, the community fell silent with grief. The morning of the funeral dawned clear and cold, the kind of day that made engine chrome glisten like tears. The funeral procession stretched for over a mile. The black hearse led the way, followed by hundreds of Hell's Angels riding in perfect formation, their bikes creating a low, steady rumble that echoed through the valley. No one revved their engines or called out. Their silence spoke volumes. Each rider wore a black armband with Grizz's name stitched in silver thread. After the service, Amber found Noah sitting alone on the church steps. She touched his shoulder gently and held out a worn envelope. "Dad wanted you to have this," she said softly. "He wrote it a few days before." Noah's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. The paper inside held Grizz's distinctive scrawl, shaky but determined. "Dear Noah, you didn't just give me your jacket. You gave me back my faith in people and in God. Promise me you'll keep giving warmth where the world goes cold. Grizz." Noah pressed the letter to his chest, his shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Amber wrapped an arm around him, sharing his grief. That evening, they met at Grizz's house to sort through his belongings. In an old leather box, they discovered photographs yellowed with age. One showed a younger Grizz, his face unlined and happy, holding a small Amber on his shoulders at a carnival. Both were laughing, caught in a moment of pure joy. "This one," Amber said, wiping her eyes, "this needs to be shared." They took the photo to Tessa's diner, where she helped them hang it in a place of honor above the counter. Now everyone who came in could see the real Grizz, not just the tough biker, but the man who found his way back to love through an act of unexpected kindness. The seasons turned slowly after Grizz's passing. Summer faded into autumn, and as September brought the start of a new school year, Noah felt the weight of routine settling back over Ridgeway. The halls of the high school seemed emptier somehow, despite being filled with students. Every morning, Noah would glance at the parking lot, remembering the day hundreds of bikers had come to stand up for him. One crisp morning, while getting ready for school, a familiar sound made Noah freeze mid-bite at breakfast. The distant rumble of motorcycles grew louder, like rolling thunder approaching. He rushed to the front door, his heart pounding against his ribs. The sight took his breath away. Hundreds of bikers lined both sides of the street, their chrome machines gleaming in the early morning light. Banners fluttered between them, bearing the words, "Kindness is strength, in memory of Grizz in bold letters. Amber stood at the head of the group, holding out a familiar leather vest. "Dad's colors," she said softly, her eyes bright with tears. "The Brotherhood thinks you should wear them today." Noah's fingers trembled as he touched the patches sewn onto the vest. It still smelled faintly of leather and motor oil, just like Grizz. "We want you to lead the ride this year," one of the older angels said, gesturing to Grizz's restored Harley. It's what he would have wanted. The entire town seemed to materialize on the sidewalks. Teachers, shop owners, and families gathered to watch. As Noah mounted the motorcycle, his former bullies approached hesitantly, heads bowed. "We were wrong," one of them said, shuffling his feet. "Can we walk with you guys?" Noah nodded, his throat tight with emotion. The procession moved through Ridgeway's streets, collecting winter coats, cash donations, and countless smiles. What had started as one simple act of kindness on a snowy evening had grown into something much bigger. A movement that proved love could change not just one life, but an entire community. The setting sun painted the Colorado sky in shades of amber and gold, much like it had done that fateful winter evening 6 years ago. Noah Dawson, now 22 years old, guided his Harley-Davidson along the familiar highway where his life had changed forever. The leather vest he wore bore a special patch that read, "Brotherhood Born of Kindness," a tribute to the movement that Grizz had inspired. He slowed the bike near the old mile marker, the same spot where he'd found Grizz lying in the snow. The memory remained crystal clear, untouched by time. Noah cut the engine and stood for a moment, listening to the cooling metal tick in the evening air. From his saddlebag, he pulled out a warm winter jacket, brand new and carefully folded. With gentle hands, Noah hung the jacket on the mile marker, just as he'd done dozens of times before. Inside the pocket, he tucked a handwritten note that read, "If you're cold, take this. ND." Such simple words, but they carried the weight of everything he'd learned about kindness and its power to change lives. As he stepped back to look at the jacket swaying gently in the breeze, headlights appeared on the horizon. They came in pairs, dozens of them, moving like a river of stars flowing through the darkness. The familiar rumble of motorcycles grew louder, the Brotherhood returning from another successful Ride for Warmth event. Noah felt tears well up in his eyes, but he didn't try to hide them. Back in Ridgeway, the annual charity ride had grown beyond anything he could have imagined. Each year, thousands of veterans received help, troubled teens found mentors, and countless lives were touched by the simple act of giving warmth to others. The convoy drew closer, chrome gleaming in the last rays of sunlight. Noah mounted his bike, kicked it to life, and joined his brothers and sisters of the road. The patch on his back caught the wind, carrying forward the message that had started with one cold night and an oversized jacket. Kindness never truly dies. It just keeps finding new hearts to call home. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.